Well, it's very nice to know that we are not the only ones concerned about climate change. The other day, I was talking with some of my colleagues, with some other ministers. And perhaps this is something linked to what we do as ministers, but we sometimes feel like tightrope walkers with this concern that at any point in time we could fall down. And I actually have a friend who is a tightrope walker, and he said the only way you can avoid falling is not to look at your feet, you have to look far ahead. And I don't know if it's a parable, but I think that it holds true for what we will be doing in this ministry. There are many choices we will need to make. Not all of them will be readily understandable unless we look at the long term. And the topic of climate change is one that is particularly complex, because the outcome of this struggle is not one that we can readily see, whether it is positive or negative, depending on the decisions that will be made. Now, I hope that it will be a happy end, a qualitative leap for humanity. At the same time, given what we are seeing in terms of trends, I'm afraid it will not be a happy ending. It is a threat for our fellow citizens. It is a threat for the whole world. It is one that is random and that we cannot always determine scientifically. And as we often tend to only react due to fear, it is one that, even though things are changing, does tend to be one of the first things on our radar. And one of our responsibilities today is to ensure that this topic be a key concern above the others. However, it is something that is a bit new in our societies, being able to combine looking at the short term, looking at suffering, at emergencies, to react when our fellow citizens ask us to, so something that is unavoidable, but at the same time, we must be safeguards to ward off suffering. We don't always get recognition, but that's not what we are here for. Our role is to ensure that when we look at fatalism, what is irreversible, that not come to the fore. And in the project I will be presenting to you, you will see that people will often say things are too complex. Economic terms, geopolitical terms, environmental terms, because in the 21st century, we are dealing with the consequences of the previous centuries. And so at times, there might be a tendency to want to resign ourselves. And sometimes this can be expressed in certain governments taking a step back, one in particular, in a context in which France will be taking a position. These are special circumstances. One of the key players in the Paris Agreement, but for the time being, is taking a break in its commitments, which of course is a painful moment in time for those who might not have the same ability to react and have the same historic responsibilities as some other nations. So it is a bit of a violent message for those, including in the United States, who are suffering from the consequences of a phenomenon that is the consequence of development that they have not triggered, that they have not benefited from, and that in the case of some nations, I'm thinking of Asia and Africa in particular, these are modes of development that perhaps took place at their detriment. All of this is accumulated and can explain why in the future there could be some violence if we do not act quickly, which is why I am so proud. France could have said, a major nation is stepping away from the climate agreement, and so we will slow down while we wait. And it is the opposite decision that was made by Emmanuel Macron, and it is really something that makes me very happy. The plan that I will be presenting to you this morning is not an end in and of itself. It is a plan, a program that will be structured over time, over the 5-year presidential term. And I'm going to be showing you the backbone. But I say this to my friends in the nonprofit sector. By definition, on this backbone, you could add in the different segments, add in the various components, and so this is a watershed, and it is based upon this architecture that in due time we will be able to add in recommendations, remarks, critiques, and this is a program that will be applied in an action plan, actions that will be set out over time. I think that you might be surprised in the short amount of time we have that we will be applying everything, but of course, the timetable has been set out. Now, why this climate plan? As I've just stated, for France to be able to play its part, to be able to continue to play its role as leader, which it has never lost from one government to the next, of course, something that I'm quite pleased about. For us to be able to ensure that the Paris Agreement, which as a reminder itself was not an end in and of itself. It was a roadmap, but everything remained to be done. But what is good with the Paris Agreement is that we were able to set out a roadmap with shared responsibilities. But we all trust that the commitments made in Paris are not necessarily placing us on the trajectory that we need, that science has showed us is necessary. So we did not want to stop there. And for the major contributors, we were going to pick up the pace so that we could revise our aims upwards. And this is the example that France wants to give. I have no doubts about this. I know that many of our partners will be seizing this opportunity to accompany us in meeting these new goals. The idea is to pick up the pace in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and I will be giving you more details later on these new objectives that, once again, are compatible with our goal of being below 2 degrees Celsius versus the pre-industrial period. The trajectory must have, and again, this is why the plan is so important. A trajectory we have set in time, but if you look over the past 2 years, it's not something I can hide. There's been a break that is not acceptable in terms of a trajectory that will be leading us to 1.5 degrees. Now, this, of course, is a plan that cannot be separate from the law on the ecological transition. And for those who might have doubts, we have a variety of objectives in terms of renewable energies, a very ambitious aim of reducing our consumption, and mechanically, simultaneously, a reduction in the share of nuclear power, 50% by 2025. Now, I will be as concise as possible, but bear in mind that we have 6 key themes that cover the international arena. You can understand that if France sets an example on its own, of course, This plan cannot be separate from the law and the framework around the law on the energy transition. As a reminder, for those who might have doubts, it is aiming at a certain number of objectives to develop renewable energies and a very ambitious aim of bringing down our consumption. And mechanically, simultaneously, a reduction in the share of nuclear power, 50% by 2050. In this area, I will try and be concise as possible, but bear in mind we have 6 key themes that cover a variety of scales, the international scale, and of course you can understand that if France sets an example alone, at a given point in time, we will end up in a situation that is disadvantageous. But it will be affecting the day-to-day lives of the French. The priorities we have set out with my 2 secretaries of state, Brune Poirceau, who is not here, who is at the Biodiversity Conference in Ajaccio. So ecosystems can help us to achieve these objectives, and Sébastien Lecornu. So the 3 of us would like to demonstrate, not only in words, the fact that if we can seize this opportunity, if we can all be consistent, we can improve the day-to-day lives of French people. These are 6 key themes that will be applied in 23 key areas, affecting all sectors. The President has placed me at a fairly high level of responsibility in the government. It was not to satisfy an oversized ego, at least I hope not. It was, in particular, to send the message that if this responsibility is borne alone, we will not be able to achieve these objectives. So it's sending out not only a message, a signal, so that everyone can take part in the climate roadmap, in the energy transition. And I would like to share the fact that this message has been heard loud and clear. At all of the meetings with ministers, the topic comes up, and I am called upon to speak on this topic. As I said, it's a plan for the next 5 years. We have some key dates. The first one, the end of 2018, which is looking at the energy budget. It will be presenting our energy policy. In this area, as is the case in many others, there are many decisions that must be made urgently every day, but urgent decisions are not a policy or a strategy. So for a variety of climate-related topics, come back to my introduction, what I'm interested in understanding is where we're going, how we will get there, and how all of the people concerned, that we make sure that this take place with co-construction, with the guidance that is necessary. And a variety of measures, of course, will be stipulated in that budget in September. Now, I mentioned 6 key themes. The first theme means making the implementation of the Paris Agreement irreversible. I was quite satisfied to observe that the French president had announced before the French Congress that the Economic, Social, and Environmental Conference would be transformed. The idea, of course, needs to be fleshed out. It is a key project. But it reflects the fact that our institutions and our laws are having to deal with the challenges that we are being faced with today. In particular, the future, our children, your children, who are not always spontaneously taken into account, because we do not always realize that the decisions made today will have an impact on them in the future. And that is what is at play. It's sort of like a river that is rising. From day to day, we're dealing with emergencies. This idea that is documented, the fact that citizens can contribute their own experience, I think is one that is based in common sense. We support this. That was already stated by our president. We support the initiative launched by Laurent Fabius for a global pact for the environment, so that at an international level, we can improve the legal text, the laws in this area. The second key area, in terms of irreversibility, is the fact that the government can do a great deal, but not everything. Perhaps less and less, I don't know. But in any case, to do so better, and to associate citizens and consumers in an innovative way in terms of tracking climate-related issues. Let me explain how. The idea is that in the decisions we will be making, we will be associating a panel of citizens embodying what I've always said, that we need to inspire our actions, to draw inspirations from what citizens do, and this climate plan will require this understanding that isn't always spontaneous. When we pull away from the long term, sometimes we see hurdles before we see benefits. And I think that in particular with the French Agency for the Environment and for Biodiversity, we will be creating this process enabling citizen participation. Now, I mentioned that we would be improving the daily lives of the French. Climate challenges can add injustices to injustice, can add inequality to inequality, precarity to precarity. If this continues, it will be very hard for me to encourage the French to move forward in this area. Now, for the French to be able to benefit concretely from the Paris Agreement, we need to pick up the pace to improve our assistance, in particular for vehicles for low-income persons. My ministry is for the ecological transition and solidarity. We didn't just add in the word solidarity. Of course, this is something that needs to be spearheaded beyond our borders, but I would like to ensure that people who have reached a point where they are suffering in 1, 2, 3 areas can benefit from this, thanks to the investment plan. The government will be proposing to the French a bonus enabling them to replace a diesel vehicle from before 1997 or a regular fuel vehicle by a clean vehicle that is either new or second-hand. Of course, it is a way of reducing pollution, but also to help households that cannot afford to buy a vehicle that meets environmental standards, and that in some major cities are therefore having a problem in terms of access. We are having a conference on mobility, and in the objectives that have been set, Elisabeth Borne, who is in charge of sustainable mobility and transport, a key area for the success of our commitments, as is the case of housing. At this conference, I am convinced that this will help us to be able to give a boost to mobility, to day-to-day transport. Elisabeth and myself want to ensure that out of the different possibilities, which are not infinite, that we can focus on 2 areas: improving the day-to-day transport for the French, that is a priority, ensuring that we maintain our road networks, that we maintain our rail networks, and of course, without setting aside the other topics indefinitely, that we be able to focus on freight being able to shift to rail. And it is by setting these priorities that we will be able to help meet these objectives and to be able to see day-to-day benefits, safer transport that is on time, faster, not just by using high-speed trains, but some areas where the trains have to slow down because the network is requiring that. So something that Elisabeth Borne is much more familiar with than I am. In the area of housing, it is quite clear, and it has been announced by President Macron, that we will be completely eliminating energy vulnerability. 10 years in order to meet this objective. In the area of housing, the government will be proposing to all low-income households in France that they carry out diagnostics so that owners and tenants in areas of energy vulnerability, people who have a very hard time heating their homes, so they are cold and they have a heating bill that in their overall budget has a larger share than that of food. The President has asked that the administration serve the French, and here is an example where we will be there to evaluate, to propose, to assist, and to make sure that we are not placing people in situations that they will have a hard time getting out of. We must help them. Over the same period of 10 years, we are going to be eliminating poorly insulated homes. Now, the area of energy efficiency is one in which we all come out ahead. When we invest in energy efficiency, sometimes you can see a factor of 2, 3, or 4, and the profitability in this area is one that can be readily demonstrated. In other areas, it can take more time, but just in a few years, we get a payback on our investment. So for me, it's not just spending. This truly involves investment. For this topic, and for the topics related to heating, here again, we can help people to heat their homes better. We will be devoting 4 billion of our investment plan for this objective. The fifth key area, helping us to improve the day-to-day lives of the French, involves more socially responsible consumption. We can help the French. We can see that the trends are low, but there's a great deal of demand here. We're going to try and reconcile the two. The French would like, and I can understand this, to consume their own electric power, what we call self-consumption. Today, 14,000 households are able to consume their own electric power, and 350,000 individual producers are able to sell their electric power back to EDF, the electric company. I'm saying this in front of the chair of ADEME, the French Environmental Agency. We can go further, and this is important, being able to generate one's own power, to be able to consume it, is something that we would all like to see. Because being able to capture power from the sun is one thing. It's not the same as producing one's own power. It's an in-depth change in our energy model. And I think that in this area, yes, we are truly on the brink of an energy revolution. It's better to be there at the beginning than to see it once it's over and to see that others benefited from it. You can believe me, the Chinese already were able to plan ahead in this area. More socially responsible consumption. That means that the French can generate, consume their own electric power, as I've already said. And we'll be providing assistance not only to French households, we'll be helping rural areas or urban neighborhoods to be able to consume their own renewable energy, such as biogas or solar energy. The sixth key area, The President has placed the bar quite high in this area, and it's something I'm quite happy about. The circular economy is at the heart of the energy transition. Now, as is the case for all of the areas, we need to change our focus. We need to ramp up the scale. It's as if we had changed software, but we need time to download the updates. We all understand what a circular economy is, even in major companies. And here we can see the world has changed, is changing. We can all see the competitive edge that is possible here. If we look at waste becoming a resource, it's not just something that has been taken on board by citizens or small and medium businesses. I saw this the other day when I went to a conference on the environment. Many of the key players are focusing on this objective and will be creating the conditions conducive to this industrial revolution, which will be a part of innovation, ensuring that it can be implemented. And on the government side, we'll be providing assistance to companies that will want to save energy, to save resources. And as part of our action plan, we'll be publishing a roadmap in 2018 on the circular economy that will be outlining a variety of measures in order to foster this development. The third theme, it's not so much that it's the most important, but it is part and parcel of this long-term vision, being able to put an end to the use of fossil energies and to be able to move towards carbon neutrality. At a given point in time, we need to be consistent. What are we hearing from the IPCC? We need to be able to meet our energy objectives and leave 3/4 of fossil energies in the earth. Now, we can set this aside. We can try and drink our fill of oil or other hydrocarbons, but then we're not credible. And we'll look at France versus other states, but France today will be making commitments, and I think that this is going to bring down some barriers. So coal, which is the key source of CO2 emissions on Earth, 5% of our generation of electric power in France, it's very little, but it's still too much. So France will be proposing that by 2020, we put an end to all coal-fired electric power. But just as is the case for all of the transitions we'll be developing, of course, we will be providing guidance to the employees impacted by these decisions. There can only be a transition if we tackle the social impact for those who are involved, and we need to come up with solutions. Sometimes I'd prefer that we take a bit more time, that we not do things brutally, because announcing one morning that we'll be closing down a reactor, having that appear in the press without the employees knowing about it, I don't see how I can steer this energy transition if we manage things this way. And so, this is what we are doing with the transition contracts we are implementing in many sectors. We don't want there to be winners and losers. We'd rather there not be losers. But there will be adaptations. We need to be able to plan ahead, to quantify them, and it is this collective intelligence we will be able to implement with my 2 secretaries of state. The 8th key area, the end of the use of fossil energy in France. France has decided to ban any new exploration project. And you know that when you have an exploration permit, you are able to use those resources. This is for gas, oil, coal, but let me reassure you right away, also for any unconventional energies. And in order to move more quickly, let me just add, I can speak about what I'm making decisions about. It is harder for things that have what has already been decided on in the past. What I'm interested in now is to ensure the procedure is faster. That involves legislation. And so late summer, early autumn, we will be proposing this type of law to Parliament. France produces gas and oil in metropolitan France and overseas, but it imports more than 90% of the fossil energy it consumes, which is why it is so important, if we want to be consistent, not to let down our guard regarding our goal of reducing our consumption by 50%. This is not something we should be afraid of. I'm sure that for businesses and for citizens, we can consume better, consume less, have the same level of service and efficiency. So let me reassure you, for small and medium businesses, there's a great potential for creativity and that we will be able to meet this challenge. So all of this will lead to the end of the use of this energy. Once we ban any new exploration permits, and therefore use permits, mechanically in 2040, the wells that are being used today will dry up. And so the trajectories, as they have been explained to me, in 2040, we will have put an end to this type of use. Now, to accompany this transition, of course, we need a variety of incentives, dissuasive measures, and so, as is the case for other areas, we need foreseeability and irreversibility. And of course, we'll be bolstering the price of carbon so that we can set a price on pollution. But also, because we can see negative aspects, but by setting a price on carbon that can rise, that means we add in a competitive edge for an economy that is low carbon. That up until now, in the world we have seen more disadvantages because fossil fuels, as you know, on a global scale, are subsidized in a variety of forms, sometimes a bit hard to see. So $500 billion total. So I think that when we look at this topic as a whole, we want to try and ensure that in terms of renewable energies, we see a trend that is slowing down, that we can help pick up the pace and ensure that these energies in economic terms become competitive. So to help spur ahead a phenomenon that has already demonstrated its usefulness. Now, the carbon price will help to encourage all of the players, businesses, households to plan ahead for an increase in the price of energy. Now, one of the benefits of the Paris Agreement that is not as visible means that we are involving all of the countries. It is important for French diplomacy. And once investors are able to take on board what we call the carbon risk, you'll see the leverage that will ensue. And I believe that will help to spur on development of what we call a green economy, the blue economy, etc. This, of course, will be an incentive in all areas for people to carefully make a decision in terms of investments in transport, housing, and so it will mean that we will have lower carbon policies. In the same vein, as was announced previously, and I can confirm this here, that we will look at a uniform tax system for diesel and for regular fuel by the end of the presidential term to accelerate the increase in the price of carbon. Now, we will have a goal of 100 euros for carbon by 2030, but don't ask me what level that will reach yet, because I've not yet defined that. It will be defined in our next finance law. But bearing in mind that all of this, of course, might seem quite easy, but when we look at the more low-income segments of the population, it could be perceived as being a penalty. So, of course, we will have measures in place to support people in difficult situations. In particular, we'll have the so-called energy check that will be implemented. Another important aspect is the fact that the climate plan also expands the price of carbon to HFCs, which are used in air conditioning. HFCs have an impact on the greenhouse effect, much higher effects than CO2. So in our strategy, we're not just focusing on carbon dioxide, we are also focusing on other substances I will not list out here. So we'll be providing support. When I was not in the government, I was a promoter for the World Coalition for the Price of Carbon. The idea is to have a convergence in terms of the price of carbon with some flexibility in the beginning, because some countries, very brave ones, have set a price for carbon, even though their economy might be a bit faltering, and despite that, they have made these commitments. So we have historic responsibility, and I think it makes perfect sense for us to go further, faster. And the price of carbon is aiming at 25% of global emissions to be covered by a carbon price in 2020, but 50% in 2030. The 10th key area, and this is an essential one in my opinion, and more than symbolically, France had committed to having its greenhouse emissions by 2050, and in line with what the French president announced when the United States announced their position on the Paris Agreement, we will be setting the objective of carbon neutrality by 2050. And with the law on the energy transition, we had a factor of 4, and we will go even further. Now, I'm not going to go into the technical details, but it also contributes to another objective I have. It's not one or the other. If we just bring down greenhouse gas emissions without using the ecosystem's ability to store some greenhouse gas, including CO2, we will not be able to reach these objectives. So carbon neutrality means that by 2050, there will be a balance between what the carbon sinks can provide and the reductions we have carried out at the same time. And this, of course, is a sizable, complicated objective, but it is a constraint that mechanically will bring about investment, savings as part of this momentum, and I am certain that, once again, we will be able to bring together our collective intelligence, our economy, our finance, and move towards an objective that will enable all of us to come out ahead. Perhaps we will not be the first, but if I'm not mistaken, for this objective, I think we're just behind Sweden and Costa Rica. So, a very nice result. This will be applied in the National Low Carbon Strategy, which will be published in 2018, but also in many major sectors, such as the automobile sector. With this in mind, we are announcing the end of the sale of fuel-driven and diesel-driven cars by 2040. And I've already noted that this morning, a European car maker just announced that, if I'm not mistaken, as of 2019, it will only be selling electric vehicles. So I'm taking this on board. This is an objective that has been made for 2030, not 2040, by President Modi of India. So this is an objective, of course, that is complicated, but Elisabeth and myself are acutely aware of the issues at hand, that our own car makers are already planning on being able to embody this promise, and that, like all of the climate agenda, is one that involves public health. We need to understand this. And that is how the Chinese became a part of the climate agenda, because in doing so, simultaneously, they were able to fight against air pollution in particular and its very tragic consequences. So climate skeptics can take this on board as well. So it was a veritable revolution, and we will be able to touch upon this later. Another theme, ensuring that France is #1 in the green economy, and ensuring that the Paris Agreement is an opportunity for the economy and for jobs. It's important. I hope we will achieve this. It is one of the objectives that we have set. I would like to be able to reconcile the environment and the economy. These two notions have often been opposed, whereas these are two words that cannot be dissociated. They even have the same etymology. It will not be too difficult to achieve this, again, if we can encourage what is moving in the right direction, slowly dissuade what is going in the wrong direction, because small and medium businesses, sometimes with major companies, have a great deal of creativity in this area. And in this transition, there can be many jobs. We need to demonstrate this. And I would like to see that what can be deemed a constraint is actually an instrument to help us get beyond the economic crisis. Of course, as was announced by President Macron, we'll be supporting research and innovation. There are areas where we already have technology. We need to look at why we are able to create technology in our country, but it flourishes elsewhere, often benefiting during the first phase from state-sponsored aids or programs. But the industrial implementation is not necessarily something we have in France. So Sébastien and myself will be focusing on this so that if they benefit from French government aids, it is normal for us to create the conditions so that they want to stay in France. Now, the idea of supporting research and innovation, you know that we have a science innovation plan, Come to France. France is bolstering this program, one that involves scientific cooperation in order to combat climate change. I brought this up at the Council of Ministers with the Minister of Research. What researchers want is a certain set of conditions for them to work and for their families so that they can come to France, so they can provide their skills, their knowledge. Just to let you know, this is in the pipeline. And I think that this will help us to benefit from this new talent and that we can be attractive in the area of science. We are candidates for the 47th plenary session of the IPCC in spring 2018, and I know that this was something that researchers welcomed. Making Paris the capital of green finance. I'm not naive. I'm not trying to change the color of the economy or change the color of finance. But if I have to choose, I would like finance to gear itself towards solutions and not towards the problem. And I will try and ensure that. We need to focus on how we can better tackle climate risks in financial regulations. Here I refer to Article 173 of the Law on the Energy Transition and Green Growth. in the legal arena in the world. That means we need to focus on climate and to choose to invest in the green economy rather than in fossil energies. And I think that we are right in doing so. We will be focusing on green bonds, France being one of the first countries to have done so. The next area, and let me assure you, we're not quite at the end, but we're at least halfway through. We, of course, are going to be speeding up the implementation of renewable energies. Here, I would like to speak to the French and say we cannot be against everything. This is an area that is difficult, can lead to conflicts locally, but we can't refuse everything. And this is criticism that I would have of myself in my previous positions. Renewable energies are the key solution for the future. Why? Because once we have machines to capture wind, sun, the movements of the waves, geothermal energy, we will have access to an endless supply of energy that ultimately will be free, well, once you have the appropriate machinery. And just to add this in parenthetically, this energy revolution that is being imposed by our climate constraints is something that will be tremendous for peace in the world. Look at most of the conflicts since World War II. Take a close look. Oil, coal, gas have never been far away. In other words, when we free ourselves of fossil fuels, I also think that we can free ourselves of sources of tension, and we will be able to bring equality back to the balance of power. This will be the case when countries have energy independence, when they have control of their energy supply. You no longer have small or large powers. You have people, men, women, children, who will be on an equal footing. But what holds true in the international arena holds true for our country as well. France has adopted a trajectory for the development of these energies. It is part of the law that my predecessor, Ségolène Royal, put forth, the objective of 32% in 2030. To be able to meet this objective, it comes back to the comment I made earlier. We will need to amplify the framework for renewables. Let me take one example to understand the complexity that I am discovering day to day. You always think you've reached the maximum level of complexity, but there's still more to come. When you have a bid for offshore wind power, between the time you organize the call for tender and the implementation, it takes 10 to 15 years because of appeals. I can understand that. But when you look at this more closely, the time it takes for that wind power to be implemented, it is no longer up to date. You have turbines that are 2 times more efficient. But you would have to go back to the initial bid, so it would take another 10 years. And I'm just explaining the current situation. If we cannot find a way of moving forward more quickly, we have commitments that are social commitments. It is to give access to more affordable, less hazardous, healthier energy. So that is why I need the understanding of all of the French. Everyone needs to understand that this is in the general interest, the vision I described earlier. So, the government will be publishing a list of the invitations to tender that will be launched over the next few years, with special emphasis, of course, on renewable energies that we would like to further develop overseas. And in metropolitan France, over our presidential term, we will have a presentation at the latest within a year, and that will be in the framework of the pluriannual energy budget. Next to the last theme, if I'm not mistaken, which is linked back to what I said earlier, mobilizing the potential of ecosystems and agriculture to fight against climate change. Agriculture is one of the most exposed sectors to the consequences of climate change. If you look around the various territories, if you look at the state of our water resources, from year to year, we can see that situations we might have seen in August are already being observed in May. This is just one aspect. What used to be an exception is now becoming a norm. Now, I'm sorry that the first report of the IPCC has had to touch upon this, but we need to acknowledge reality so that we can take action. Now, in the climate plan, of course, we are planning to begin a transition of our agricultural systems. Agriculture is not perhaps the problem. It can be the solution. But for it to be the solution, there needs to be an advantage for it to do so. And that is the idea behind the conference that we will be undertaking so that we can garner our collective intelligence that perhaps not as an objective will also involve reassuring farmers psychologically, economically, ensuring their health and safety. And I hope that alongside that, we'll be able to bring back the confidence they had in the urban world, the respect they've always had, and that is why I'm counting on this food conference to achieve this. We will most likely be launching that in July. But the principle behind this conference is to take time so that people can change their stances and so that intelligence and common sense can prevail. I'm not going to go into detail on the workshops, on wasting food, on reducing inputs. We have some room for maneuver there. As a country that has been using pesticides, insecticides, and so improvement can be achieved. Someone pointed out the other day that I wasn't thinking about protecting farmers. Yes, I do consider that it's a priority. They are often the first victims of this excessive use. I could give some very tragic examples. The farmers are being impacted. The sixth key area, putting an end to imported deforestation in France. The climate plan provides for a very quick end to this imported deforestation. Products leading to the destruction of the three key rainforests in the world, in Amazonia, Southeast Asia, and the Congo Basin. For example, for the production of oil, palm oil or soy oil. And it's a very important decision. We've been closing a window that had provided a possibility for biofuels to use palm oil. But all of this, of course, is part and parcel of my vision of the agricultural model, as I would dream it, for our livestock to be fed by imported plant protein that is produced under conditions that are detrimental to the Amazonian forest. This is an inconsistency I've pointed to, an inconsistency I'd like to put an end to. The New York Declaration, which was published in parallel to the Paris Agreement, which plans for having deforestation by 2020, putting an end to it in 2030. The climate plan, of course, is part of this objective. As a reminder, deforestation is responsible for 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. It is underestimated. And as we say, it is one thing for us to urge industrial players to bring down their emissions, but it is schizophrenic to do so when millions of hectares of farming land that are carbon sink are being transformed. When we look at coral reefs, farmland being destroyed, in complete indifference and stupidity, because on the one side we are reducing things, on the other side we're giving up. Of course, you can readily understand that will not work. 17th area. It is a climate plan over 5 years. You can understand that 3 measures would not be enough. You're lucky you have a press kit with the entire plan, and I've just pulled out the essential. Supporting non-governmental players acting in favor of the environment. As I stated earlier, in order to have a successful implementation, we must mobilize all of the players, but not just governments. In particular, large metropolitan cities. I've always supported the initiative chaired by Anne Hidalgo, the C40, as well as the initiative R20, supported by Arnold Schwarzenegger. But at the same time, the actions carried out in the territories. We know that 50% of the actions are at that level. And believe me, I am not confusing the brutal attitude of the Trump administration with the mindset of the United States. Brune Poisson, a few days back, was speaking with the mayor of Pittsburgh, who was one of the examples of people in the United States resisting this federal governments, other economic players, a plethora of startups and major companies, including sometimes amongst the oil companies. Some have understood that things are underway. There are 2 ways of looking at the future. Either you turn your back, or we have decided to extend a hand and to build things together. In this climate diplomacy with Jean-Louis Le Drian, we are sincerely involved. I can't be everywhere, even though I'm in charge of the negotiations on biodiversity, the oceans, climate. I have 2 secretaries of state who are helping me, but French diplomacy, I had been a special envoy for the Conference of Paris. We can see the diplomacy in France is focusing on this really at the forefront, and in terms of adapting our institutions, the Carbon Coalition, and Laurent Fabius's initiative, which in New York in September, we will be attempting to defend in that arena. I can just tell you that is part of the set of diplomatic priorities we have. It would be unfortunate for us to lose what we've already gained in this area. Now, last on the list, but first in my heart, supporting developing countries. I have often said that when some are cynical, some are fatalistic, this feeds the fanatism of others. And I think that many are not aware of the extreme violence that was sent by this sort of denial, saying, we're pulling out. Since Copenhagen, we have promised money that unfortunately we've not seen the first dollar of, the first euro of. You have had to deal with the consequences of how we developed it. Now you're on your own. So very cynically, I would say, if we do it for them, let's do it for ourselves. In a world that is interconnected, believe me, all of this has been fully understood. We have a responsibility. We have committed to mobilizing $100 billion for developing countries coming from a variety of sources. Now, when I say a variety of sources, this is not hiding any flows. I will, of course, ensure that we can understand what share involves financing, what share involves loans, making sure that those not eligible for loans will also be able to benefit. It should enable developing countries to bring down their emissions, for example, by fighting against deforestation or by choosing renewable energies. But it must also enable us to help the victims of climate deregulation, those victims of natural disasters, helping them to rebuild homes, infrastructures after a typhoon or a hurricane, and being able to fight against drought in the area of farming. Now, something that some do not know, climate change throughout the world each year results in 3 times more displaced populations. They're not yet called climate refugees. When I look at how worked up people can get about movements, about migration, again, this is just a reality we cannot hide. Now, $5 billion per year in 2020, $1 billion of which for adaptation. So the Green Fund, $1 billion between 2015 and 2019, and the African Initiative we are supporting for renewable energies, over $2 billion in 2015 and 2020. Now, I'm aware all of this can seem quite extensive. I hope that is something that we can make desirable. But the message I would like to convey is that we all need to help. It is not a challenge for one sector. It is universal, meaning all of us are concerned. We all must contribute. Help us to plant trees that we will never be leaning against, but that perhaps our children will be able to lean against. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.